Welcome to the podcast today. We are so excited to have Annie Mahon. We are here talking about her most recent book, Things I Did When I Was Hangry, Navigating a Peaceful Relationship with Food. She founded Circle Yoga in 2003 in order to bring mindfulness and yoga to people of all ages. She is the co-founder of DC Yoga Week and Yoga on the National Mall and the Opening Heart Mindfulness Community. She is active in much of the grassroots community yoga and mindfulness activities in the Washington, D.C. area. And this is my favorite part. She holds master's degrees in both computer science and religious studies. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Rick.
My pleasure. So one of the things that this is sort of a funny place to start, but I wanted to ask you, could you tell us how you came to be hypnotized in a Bob's Big Boy restaurant where you used to work?
Sure. Yeah. I worked at a Big Boy's as a waitress, and the owner turned out to have this interest in hypnotism and started learning how to hypnotize people and invited people who wanted to get hypnotized to go back into his little office in the back. And so because I was game for anything at the time, I was sounded cool. And so I went in the back and was hypnotized, which led to my then really developing an interest in hypnotism and self-hypnotism, and that sort of led to my interest in meditation.
Because it really seems that was one of the first places that you learned about the ability to maybe alter the mind or adjust the mind or somehow temper the mind. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the self-meditation, or the self-hypnosis book that I discovered really led me to meditation, because it was a kind of guided meditation that I would do by myself. And I would just read from the book silently to myself and practice calming. You're feeling sleepy, you're feeling calm. And I discovered that I could control some of the anxiety that I had, especially as a teenager, and just really enjoyed that feeling and wanted more of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So the title of your book is called Things I Did When I Was Hangry. Why hangry and not hungry?
Well, hangry, as you probably know, is a combination of hungry and angry. So a lot of times when we're really hungry, it triggers these other emotions. And so a lot of my life, I think I was hungry, and I was distracted by food so much of the time and obsessing on food, whether I should eat, whether I shouldn't eat, what should I eat, how do I look, what did I eat too much, did I not eat enough? That all of that led me to really be distracted by other emotions and act out in other ways.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Could you give us, we'll come back and talk about this more a little bit later, but could you give us like a 101 on eating mindfully? What that means to you?
Yeah, mindful eating. It's a kind of a tricky thing because it can sometimes be used as another way to control our eating, but that's really not the purpose of it. Really, the purpose of mindful eating is just to be with what's there, to be with the food, to enjoy the people we're with, just to be present during the time of eating rather than just mindlessly shoveling food in our mouth or,
Welcome to my life.
Whatever, yeah. Right. It's one of the hardest mindfulness practices I've ever encountered.
Wow.
Me. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that really struck me about your book is really from the get-go, you really have such a great memory of food you ate from such a young age. And you do a really great job about tracing that from like the food you ate when you were younger. And how that just sort of seemed maybe innocent and innocuous. And then you really have a great way of just taking that through the book and how it really started to become a little bit more serious. And then it really turned into something, like an addiction and something very heavy. So could you talk a little bit about, do you remember the big shift when it became what we might call serious or, that moment it shifted for you from just innocuous eating to something else?
Well, really it all shifted around the age of like 11 or 12 when I started to somehow wake up to the fact that food could be a bad thing. I think before that, quote unquote, a bad thing, not really a bad thing, but could be seen as a bad thing. Because before that, to me, food was just a yummy thing. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. And some things I didn't like, and that was no big deal. Some things I loved, and that was great. But at some point, all of a sudden, I became aware that some people didn't see food that way, like older people, like adults, especially my parents, and especially my dad had an eating issue. And so I said, okay, I'd seen a lot of this stuff at the table growing up, a lot of this kind of weirdness around food, but then suddenly I became aware that, I should now be controlling my eating or eating certain things or not eating certain things, and that suddenly it went from being a body-oriented relationship with food to being a head-oriented relationship.
I get that.
Yeah.
one of the things you say, which I loved, which is by focusing more and more of my attention on food, I could avoid feeling my unwanted emotions.
Right.
So I'm always interested in that relationship between food and emotion.
Yeah.
To what degree do you think emotions really are covered up or stuffed down, or all that stuff we hear about by food? Because it's something I hear a lot, and I'm always like, that's not me. I'm not stuffing down my emotions. And I know that's sort of not true.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe you're not.
Oh, no.
I definitely am.
I am, Annie. I am stuffing down my emotions. No, I'm kidding.
No, I totally am. I can tell you yesterday I thought about it. I think about it every day. I mean, every day I can tell when something's coming up and I feel like I really want to eat something, or I really want to, there's some kind of like a feeling that comes up. It's not even associated anymore so much with a food, because I don't have quite the same level of habits with particular foods anymore, but it's more like I need something to fill something right now. Like there's this feeling of there's an emptiness there. I need something to fill it. And it's funny, I described a day, when I gave a talk recently, I described a day where these 3 really annoying things happened to me. One was a really unpleasant call with my dad. Then I had a terrible review on Goodreads, my only bad review, which I ended up loving because they said I was a hot mess. And I was like, I kind of am a hot mess, and that's okay. And then the third thing was they closed right as I walked into UPS store, they closed it. And I had all these bags of things to ship. So I sat there in my car and I had that feeling of like, there's got to be something I can do right now. Something I can, fill this up. And immediately I was like, what food is on this block? Like, what restaurants are here? It's this feeling of like, it's this emptiness or not even an emptiness, but a feeling like something bad might bubble up if I don't close it down and with some food. So for me, that's how it works. It's like, there's a feeling like I was angry, I was sad, I was having all these emotions, and I thought, if I can find the right food on this block and eat it, then I won't have to feel that.
Wow.
Even though I know that's not true, there's some part of me believes it.
That idea of bubbling up really resonates with me, because I actually do feel like, when I get to that place, I can feel something to start rising up. And and you do feel the need to do something about it.
Right.
What would you say to someone who says, I'm not an emotional eater, I don't stuff my emotions down? Yeah.
Well, I would say maybe you don't. And then again, if I have time to sit with them, if I'm doing like a mindfulness practice with them, I might invite them to just remember a time when they had, if they're coming because they have some eating habit that they're not happy about, then I might just invite them to remember that time and just say, when you were in that moment, really checking in with your body, what did it feel like? And just slowly, we kind of have to peel it back. There's a lot of denial. There's a lot of parts of us that come in to protect us from really feeling these things. So slowly starting to just see what's really there in a really compassionate way. We can't just tear the mask off. We have to really take time to get to know what's really happening.
To take those layers back.
Yeah.
But this is the other thing you said in your book that I really resonated a lot, which is this whole idea of, I forget what you were talking about. You had made the statement that you realized that something was an example of how many wasted years of your life were spent worrying about what you should eat.
It just, I cringe when I think about it.
I'd say a big thing that comes through my mind right now, because I feel like, my God, am I really going to look back on my life and think, Rick, good job all those hours spent thinking about the food, thinking about your waistline, thinking about your body. Yeah.
Or what's wrong. And it's funny because I don't know if you have this, but the way I felt at a certain time in my life, when I go back and look at a picture, I don't look like how I thought I looked.
What is that about? It's what I mean?
Thoughts.
It's crazy.
It's those thoughts. They lead us to think that we look a certain way. Even when we don't, they're trying to control our mind in a way. They say, you're really overweight, or you're really this, or you're really ugly, or whatever it is. And then we look back, we're like, you get perspective and you can see. Yeah. So that's why I think it's wasted, because it's like, we'll look back someday and be like, that was time I could have been enjoying my life.
I could have been eating more and enjoying what I was eating.
Enjoying it. That's the difference. And not just punishing myself for eating it. Yeah.
Well, I'll bring that up in just a minute, but that whole idea of shame and guilt and how that relates to eating is huge. Yeah. But that whole idea you just tapped on, which is so true. I mean, to this day, and Kate and I have talked about this on the podcast, and how I will look back and see photos of myself and I thought I was huge. I mean, I was definitely chub, but, not as large as I was, to the degree I was called names and people thought I was, and then I had to be put on these diets. It's really fascinating, that whole idea of what your body really was when you look back on it.
Yeah. I agree with that.
the other thing that, well, let's go back to this sort of shame and guilt thing. To what would you, because I know I have a lot of guilt when I eat, particularly when I overeat. So what's sort of the biggest piece of advice you would give to someone who I think experiences guilt or shame in relation to the food? Sort of, I think post like an immediate, for me, sometimes there's an immediate sense of shame and guilt when I'm actually eating. And then I'm like, there's sort of that post-shame and guilt. An hour later, I'm like, oh man, what did I do?
Well, I think if we realize how wasteful that energy is in that moment, that it's not going to change anything, that helps me a lot. Like if I think, okay, I just ate something maybe I wish I hadn't eaten. Or maybe it was too much of something, or maybe, it was a bunch of gelato or dark chocolate gelato I had last night that was so good. But so whatever it is, if I in that moment, I can bring myself back to the moment and think, if I go down that path and I really keep thinking all of this, it's not going to change what just happened. It's not going to change anything, except to get me caught up in the cycle more.
Right.
So if I can remember that, even just in a moment, then I'm less likely to do that. If I can just say, okay, that happened, and if I keep thinking about it, it's going to be more likely to happen again, or I'm going to be more unhappy. But if I can say, it happened, and if I can let it go, I'm less likely to continue down that path. Then I can sort of soothe it.
Do you have a primary practice that you use in the moment?
I do.
You know what I mean? Like, what is it that snaps you out?
For me, it's what I described. So I also practice focusing, which is a kind of mindfulness practice of emotions. And so that allows me to stay present and see, okay, so there's something in me right now that feels guilty or feels ashamed. And that's not all of me. And so once I can do that and I can turn toward that part of me that feels ashamed, I'm no longer the shame. I'm the whole me.
I get that.
That turns toward that part and says, yeah, you feel ashamed right now because for really good reasons, because you were shamed as a child, or you lived in this culture for 50 years. You couldn't avoid, believing these messages. So I turn toward it with that kind of attention, that kind of caring attention, and that usually will begin the shift of bringing me back to myself and away from that shame cycle.
How would you describe how that works for you now compared to like 15 years ago? Because I'm always into this question of, do habits really change? Do they just get managed? Do they go away? I'm always interested to know how it shows up for people.
I'm so interested in that too. And so what I do is I go back and look, and I really, really try to be objective, because I agree. Sometimes I think, oh, nothing ever changes. But I see that I have a totally different relationship with food than I used to. And even though, of course, it's never perfect, so I go back to that example I said where I was like thinking what's to eat on this street that I could eat when I was stressed out. So in 15 years ago, that thought would have happened. I would have been buying the food before I even noticed that I was having that thought, and I would have eaten it. In this case, I was sitting in the car having that thought and really, really fantasizing about what food it could be. And then I thought, oh, that's what you're doing. There's part of me that thinks that if I get this food, I'll be happy. And I immediately then knew that wasn't true. And so then I picked up the phone and I called my sister and I called my daughter, actually. I called one of my daughters who's also struggled with eating issues. Because I was going to a meditation group, and I'm sitting in the car and I'm like, I don't even want to go to meditation. I just want to go eat.
Awesome.
And so my daughter said, you can do whatever you want, but generally you feel better if you go to meditation. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I really don't want to go. And then I cried. And then I said, okay, I'm going to just go for a minute, and I'm going to leave if I want to leave. And so I went in and I sat in meditation. I cried. I really just let those feelings flow. I was just feeling so sad about what happened on the phone with my dad, and about the bad review, and about the UPS thing, which was nothing, but it was like the cherry on top.
Just to send you right over the edge.
Exactly. But once I really was able to sit, I was 45 minutes in meditation and just letting that all happen. And even though I wasn't 100% better, I was like 80% better at the end.
Nice.
And 15 years ago, I could not. I certainly would not have gone to meditation, and I probably would have had a binge. So.
Isn't it interesting, this whole idea about how what something's going to do to you and how it's going to make you feel, and it's not right for you, but yet the pull, right? The lure, the sort of, for lack of a better word, right? The craving is so strong. It's so strong.
And that's because we're merged with that part that learned how to behave that way. It learned that's how it could feel better. And once we start to see, so the first step is to see it. And of course, in the beginning, I could see it and I would still do it. I'd be like, oh yeah, something in me wants to binge. Okay, I'm going to eat. And then I would eat. And then I started to be able to see, okay, something he wants to eat, and then maybe I wouldn't eat as much. You know, it was a slow process, really, that now I can see it and be like, yeah, maybe I don't need to eat. Maybe I don't. Maybe that's not true. It's almost like waking up to what's true.
Right.
Like we're in this trance of this part that really believes it. But there's also, if we really look deeply, we know there's a part of us that really knows that's not true. And we know we're not going to feel good in the long run if it's something unhealthy, you know?
Right.
And this is not to at all say that eating is bad in any way, because that is a worry that I have, is that I never want to project that, you know, eating something delicious is not a bad thing. It's really more the state in which we eat it. You know, if we're eating it because we feel, you know, sad or depressed and we're not looking at those feelings, you know, that may not be as a healthy way to deal with those feelings. But it's not about the food or about gaining weight or any of that.
Right. Could you tell that story in your book called I Ate the Whole Mango? I sort of love it.
Yeah, that's one of those stories. Sometimes I wrote actually in the blog first that story, and it's like one of those stories that when I write it, I'm just like, okay, hello, shame. You know? It's like, how does a mother do that? But I really did. I said,
I love that you wrote it, though.
Well, and it feels better once I wrote it. I felt better. But I literally had one mango in the house. And I have one daughter, my daughter Hannah, who loves mangoes. And so I knew she was sitting in the other room. I knew she would love to have that mango. And so I cut it, and I thought, I'll give half to her. So I ate half of the mango, and I was really happy. And I thought, I don't want to give the other half to her. I want to eat it myself. And I did. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe I just did that. And she came in the kitchen, and of course she wouldn't have known unless I told her. But
right. You told her, yeah?
Of course I told
That's
her,
good.
Yeah. Made it worse. Rub it in. I just ate a whole mango.
You could have had that.
Exactly.
But no.
You could have had the whole thing.
Let's jump back a little bit, too. So let's go back to this whole idea of eating mindfully. So your whole journey basically led you into a path in Buddhism. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about your primary teacher?
Yeah. So Thich Nhat Hanh is my primary teacher. He's a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk who lives in France. He was exiled from his own country about 50 years ago now. And he teaches mindfulness from a perspective of daily life practice. So I also study with some Zen teachers, Roshi Joan Halifax, who I'm going to see tomorrow for a retreat. And those practices, the more Japanese style Zen, are much more about like sitting on your cushion and a certain amount of time and really practicing. And I do that too, and I love that. And I've also gone on silent retreats. But Thich Nhat Hanh's practice is about mindfulness in daily life. Like, you don't have to sit on a cushion all day, but can you be present when you're sitting and talking to your child? Can you be present when you're walking down the street? You know, can you feel your steps? Can you connect with the earth? You know, that's really the practice. And to me, that's the much harder practice, you know, than sitting on a cushion. It's relatively easy to be present. But when you're faced with someone who's like yelling in your face, right? Or someone who's disappointed in you, or there's a lot of places where it's much harder.
Or all that stuff that comes up, you know, for you that causes you to sort of react and eat or consume in a very particular way.
Exactly.
One of the stories you told, so when we think about mindful eating, what does that look like for you? And when you're like really doing it, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so when I'm really practicing mindful eating, generally at first I notice that I'm going to eat something. Like, that's the very first thing. It's just like, oh, I'm sitting here and there's some food in front of me. So generally I will at least bow to my food or say a little something. If it's a group of us, I'll usually say like the 5 contemplations about food, and
what are the 5?
Which are in the book.
Okay.
They're very simple, but there's 5 ways of sort of just remembering the food. It's a gift. The food is a gift of the whole universe. I'm not going to remember them all right now. But the 5 contemplations, I'll either read those, say those, or I'll just bow to my food. But so recognizing I'm going to eat. Okay. I'm empty. There's food there. I'm going to put that food inside of me. Just so really basic physical stuff, like there's a plate of food. And then once I start to eat, I try not to get too distracted. Not to say I don't. I do get distracted. Sometimes I even check my email. Not perfect. What? But, you know, I forget who it was who said, you know, when eating, eat. When reading and eating, read and eat. You know, so you can be mindful of anything, really. But but generally, if I'm really trying to be present with my food, after I've acknowledged the food, I try to eat it in a a sensual way. Like I really feel it in my mouth. I taste it. I notice it. I'm not just, we can certainly eat a whole meal and not even taste it, which is, to me, is unbelievably weird that we can do that. But we can, because our mind is somewhere else. But bringing my mind to the food and really tasting it. And really one of the tricks is to set my fork down or my spoon or whatever I'm using in between each bite.
Really?
Yeah. Because that just gives me a moment to pause, be like, chew my food, be with that bite. So that's the practice. And then when I'm finished, I try to notice that bowl is now empty or that plate's now empty and I'm full. So now it's in me. So it's just kind of a remembering, really, which is the definition of mindfulness, is remembering, really.
So when I hear you say that, what I think is, my God, that takes a long time.
Yeah, and that's why I don't do it all the time.
Because I've done these exercises before, and I'm like, how does anyone get anything done trying to eat 3 meals a day?
Yeah, no, it's true. And of course, with the eating with people, right?
That's always fun, yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to be just like, ignoring everyone and being silent and not interacting. Of course, we're going to interact because food is also social as well. So really, it's just mindfulness can be mindfulness of anything. So mindful eating is just trying to bring our mind to the food at least part of the time we're eating, even if we can't do it every bite. On retreat, we do every bite. At home, we just try to remember this is food, this is what it tastes like. If we're going to be mindful for the first bite, that's even something.
I get that.
Yeah.
One of the other things you wrote about in your book is, what's his name? I forget. Close Encounters and Addiction with Dr. Gabor.
Gabor Mate. Oh, I love him, yes.
So he wrote that whole thing about a hungry ghost, which I found really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah, well, the idea of the hungry ghost is a Buddhist concept. It's the idea that there are these beings that have these long, thin necks and a huge, hungry belly, and they can never get enough food because they can't get it down their throat.
Papa? Can you hear me, Papa?
Yeah, so that's how we live. And it's not just about food. If you think about it, it's like, could be anything. Any kind of thing that we're craving that we just never satisfies us. And that kind of ties back into what I was saying earlier. When I feel that kind of bubbling up and I think there's something I need to eat, I need to like get rid of that feeling. That's actually exactly a hungry ghost feeling. It's like, there's part of me knows that food isn't going to satisfy that thing because that thing is something totally unrelated to food and hunger. It's sadness or anger or frustration or whatever, jealousy or whatever feeling is there. But or even a lot of times for me, and I think a lot of people, it's fatigue. There's a level of fatigue a lot of us are operating under that we consume to try to like not pay attention and keep going. Right? So we get something to eat at our desk and we have a little snack and we want to keep going because we're not willing to take the time to rest because this culture doesn't really value that.
Right.
Right?
Sometimes I feel pressured to have to eat 3 meals a day.
You do?
I do.
I love to eat 3 meals a day.
Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, here it is again, this whole process. Particularly if you're trying to eat well, which I am, right? Which means shopping.
Yes.
Keeping stuff fresh and then cooking. Like the idea of like dealing with that 3 times a day, I am fatigued by it.
I totally get that. And you know what? That's a problem that I also know because I have 4 grown children. They are like, why did you never teach us how to cook? And, we don't know how to cook. And so now they're having to learn how to cook on their own. And I grew up, I didn't really learn directly from my mom, but my mom cooked. And so I learned from there. I learned because I'm interested in cooking. I'm interested in food. And so for me, like in the morning, I'll get up and I'll make breakfast, like oatmeal or whatever, usually an oatmeal-ish type of thing. And at the same time, I'll make something for lunch if I don't have something left over. Yeah. And then dinner usually could be carry out. It could be, me making something small. If I'm the only one home, I'll just make something small or get a sweet green or something like that. So
I sort of love the idea of cooking lunch at breakfast because I can handle breakfast and I can handle dinner. But lunch. That middle thing, man, I'm like, can't I just go to the cafe?
Right? It's kind of like when you went to school. You had to either bring your lunch or buy your lunch, right? It's hard to like have 3 times when you're going to the kitchen to make something.
Yeah.
So when I worked at the studio every day, I brought my lunch every day.
It's funny. I work at home.
No, but that's worse. I think that's worse because you could have the time. Right, and then you'd be like, well, that's going to take an hour and a half. Yeah. Right?
Yes, totally.
Right, so make it in the morning and like pretend like you're gone.
And a lot of times, because I work at home, I'm always like, I need to get out of the house. I think I'm going to go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
So it's a big excuse I use to sort of eat out quite a bit more than I should.
Yeah. Well, that's a hard one too, because the portions are just so enormous.
Yeah.
At every restaurant.
It's crazy, isn't it? There's nothing mindful about that.
No, and if you're the kind of person like me that like feels guilty if you leave food, like, oh my God, I don't want to waste this because I know no one else is going to eat it. So then either you bring it home and eat it later. We went out to brunch recently, and I just was amazed. It was this enormous brunch at George Brown's. Have you been there?
Yeah, not for a while.
Enormous. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, you get to take a whole entree home.
Come on.
I was like, what? What did I do with that? I just stuffed myself. But then you don't have to cook later is the idea.
There you go.
So the whole day they've taken care of your day. Yeah, exactly.
At one point in the book, you were talking about sitting down to meal with your parents and just what that meant, because they both had different eating styles. And this is something Kate and I are going to do a future episode on. But this whole idea, I think, is so interesting about when other people's food issues become your food issues. And how do you combat that, particularly in this culture? Because what you just said a few minutes ago, like, my sister is really a slow chewer and very thoughtful, and it's amazing. And I don't know how we came out of the same womb. It baffles me. And many meals will be out. Everyone's done. Plates are gone. And she's still there chomping away because she's just very thoughtful about it. Always has been.
Wow.
We used to think it was an excuse so she didn't have to do all the dishes at the dinner table.
Oh, wise.
We do all the... Yeah, exactly. So so I wonder, like, I'm really cut up sometimes when people, like, you make too much food. You go to their house and then they force it on you when you leave. I can't bear it.
I agree. It's so hard. I mean, my older sister one time said, I'm like, how are you throwing that away? She's like, I'd rather throw it down there than throw it down here, meaning herself. And I was like, that's a really good point. Because I'm so afraid to throw it away, but it's like kind of being thrown away anyway, in a way, kind of going through us. I mean, it benefits us. But if you're composting or if it's going somewhere, it's benefiting the bugs, right?
Were you the type of family where you had to finish everything on your plate before you could leave the table?
Pretty much. But we also had like a 5-minute dinner.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, no, literally 5 to 10 minutes and we were done with dinner because my parents both taught at night. And so we would literally sit down at 5 exactly, and by 5:10 at the latest, someone was up doing the dishes.
Whoa, that's intense.
It's intense. And we all eat like that. And my brother's wife is like your sister, where she eats so slowly that we were all like, what is going on? We've never seen anything like that. You know, we are all just like, boom, we are done. And even now when we're together, I just see it. I've slowed down quite a bit. I'm still not as slow as most people.
Right.
I'm still really fast. But relative to my siblings, I can see. But I don't know, I think we have to really find it in ourselves, because the culture is never going to be, at least that I can see, is not going to be supportive of being present with your food, slowing down, really enjoying it. I mean, sometimes I enjoy it, and when I'm in Europe, my son lives part-time in France, and going out to dinner there, I find it's a different kind of energy.
Definitely, right?
It's like you got time. You're like, hey, we got time.
I was out to dinner with friends last week, and we had just finished the meal, like put our things down. We ordered dessert, and I think the dessert took like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes to get there. The waiter came up and apologized that it took so long, and he took it off the bill.
You're kidding.
I'm sorry about the wait on the dessert. And we were all like,
wow. What? Right. We've forgotten how to wait.
Yeah, right?
That feeling.
That's a great way to say it.
Yeah. And it's really good to be able to learn how to do that. I find it still hard. I'm very impatient. But it's good. It is good because the other thing I've discovered over the years is that if I eat slowly enough, like, I really recognize that I'm full. Whereas if I eat it really quickly, I still think I'm so hungry, and then later on I feel sick. I'm like, I ate too much.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right, so here's a couple questions for you. This is sort of like our tips and techniques section.
Okay.
All right. So what is the one thing you would recommend for people to do, like, the next time they sit down? What's the one takeaway that they should think about the next time they sit down?
Well, the next time they sit down, just pause before you eat. Just look at your food, take it in, see what it is. Sit on your chair, really feel yourself sitting on your chair, take a breath and see, wow, I've got this food and I'm about to eat it. And boy, aren't I lucky. And wow, it's going to be good and I'm going to really enjoy it. And just take 1 or 2 breaths and just recognize you're about to eat.
And then how do you practice kindness towards yourself and others on a daily basis? What's that look like for you? For
me, the kindness has to do with this, what I was describing as really seeing those parts of me that are suffering or that are having a difficulty as really not all of me. And so that I can then be in the seat of someone who's like taking care of those parts, so that I can see, oh, there's part of me that's really scared right now, and really looking at it with compassion. And I would say if there's one thing that has changed my life more than anything else, it's that. It's being able to be compassionate toward those parts of myself. Because when there's a part of me that's acting like it's afraid or it's having a reaction and it wants to eat, there used to be another part that would judge that part as bad and say, that's really bad, you shouldn't do that. And the fact of those two parts being there is what kept this whole pattern in place. As soon as I could separate out and be like, oh, yeah, you're feeling really scared. Okay, then things shifted.
Okay. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And what is mindfulness to you? What's your definition of mindfulness?
My definition of mindfulness, I don't have a ready-made one. It's kind of ever evolving. But in this moment, I would say it's just being right here with you.
Thank you. Yeah. Isn't that the key too?
Yeah.
Well, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm very happy to have done
tell
this.
people how they can find you.
So my blog and website is www.rawmindfulness.com. Like raw, like R-A-W, rawmindfulness.com. And my book is on Amazon and at bookstores, Things I Did When I Was Hangry, Navigating a Peaceful Relationship with Food.
Thank you, Annie Mahon. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ray. It's great.
Thank you. Make sure you subscribe, review us, and share us with your friends. You can find Annie at rawmindfulness.com. She has a great blog you can follow. You can find her book, Things I Did When I Was Hangry, Navigating a Peaceful Relationship with Food, on Amazon, her website, or our website, youwon'tbelievewhatIate.com. You'll find that in the program notes under the podcast section. Make sure you follow us on Facebook. And as always, this podcast is supported by awesome people such as yourselves. If you become a supporter, you will get other things from Kate and I that no one else is getting, such as meditation, articles, and tips and techniques. That support can be given through a link on our website to PayPal, as we are no longer going through patreon.com. Also, remember, be on the show. Send us your MP3 you record on your phone. Send it to youwon'tbelievewhatIate@gmail.com. Record it with a friend the next time you are out at dinner. Tell us what you ate last night, tell you how you felt about it then, and how you feel about it now. Thanks for listening.